we will need to ensure that Canada can succeed in a drastically different world. The old relationship we had with the United States, based on deepening integration of our economies and tight security and military cooperations, is over.
When I come back, what that's over means, and I'll be joined this morning by my guest, Daryl Franzo. He's a Saskatchewan farmer who's effectively been hit by the canola tariff from China. And why does Mark Carney do nothing about it? When we come back, more about that. We need political change. But we also need the resolve to resist. So Mark Carney says it's over, does he? And what's his solution? Closer ties to the European Union? Canada becoming a member of the European Union? We've already been told that's impossible. And Europe is a powder keg. I was going to say a literal powder keg, but no, not really. But it is becoming more and more explosive as it invites a nuclear war with Russia. It's talking about a third world war like it's nothing. So do we really want to be aligned with the European Union? What Canada needs is to be less dependent. Canada's always been dependent, first of all, on Great Britain as part of the empire. We were hewers of wood and drawers of water. We were the natural resources we gave to Great Britain that then sold them back to us. After the collapse of the empire, the United States fulfilled that role. We were dependent on the United States. And that's been the history of Canada, dependence. Can we do something differently here? Because Donald Trump is always complaining about what he calls a $200 billion subsidy. It's not. There's no subsidy. It's called a trade deficit, and it's 60 billion, not 200 billion. And it's all because the United States wants our cheap oil and gas. Now, this is a fact. Now, Pierre Poilievre is the only one talking about this of Mark Carney and himself. And of course, Daniel Smith from Alberta has said this. Daniel Smith has said, let's get other markets for our oil and gas. We can't rely on the United States principally, or even entirely. We have to find other world markets. So Daniel Smith is taking a lead on this. Pierre Poilievre has mentioned we sell the United States cheap crude and we buy it back after it's refined. Can Canada be less dependent? We need to be independent. But there's a bigger challenge right now. And people talk about this like, oh, well, you know, we can always go to the grocery store. If you don't have food to eat, my friends, there's nothing else to talk about. And this is why we have to focus on the farm crisis. My guest this morning, Saskatchewan farmer Daryl Fransoo. Daryl, thank you for joining me.
No problem. It's nice to be here.
Well, it's nice to have you because I am concerned about the food we eat and the fact that, and I've had numerous people over the years on this broadcast talking about the fact that farmers are the last concern of the federal government, and it's always seems to be that way. But right now, we have a unique problem. I'm not going to say challenge. I hate that word because people are suffering right now because of this. It's not a challenge to people who are suffering. But before we get into that, and this is the canola crisis that I'm calling it the canola crisis because it's a Chinese tariff on canola. It's killing Canadian farms, killing Canadian farmers like you. But can you tell me, Daryl, how long have you been farming?
I've been farming about 20 years. I farm in northern Saskatchewan. It's a family farm, and unfortunately, I feel that way, David. The government doesn't have our back. With this canola, it's canola, peas, and pork and seafood, you know, a bunch of things that Canadian producers produce and feed the world with. The government's silent on it. They don't have our backs. They haven't done anything about it. So, you know, out in the West, for sure, we feel that they don't care.
Well, they certainly seem to have never cared very much. What was the price of canola before the tariff from China took effect and this trade war began?
We were at about $14.50 a bushel, and we went down to about $12.30 a bushel. So there was about a 15 to 20% loss on the price.
Wow, that's absolutely phenomenal. I just want to, and of course, this is all about, and I find this fascinating. Why is there a tariff on canola? People might ask. Well, it's all to do with electric vehicles. And this is fascinating to me because, of course, electric vehicles are going or catering. Nobody is buying electric vehicles. The market has basically reached its apex and it's declining. So, but instead of taking the tariff off Chinese electric vehicles so we can get China to take off the tariff on canola, peas, and pork, no, we're sticking to our guns on that because I think this is once again it's part of the Mark Carney and previously Justin Trudeau agenda of forcing us, compelling us to buy these electric vehicles, and farmers be damned. What do you think of that?
You know what the crazy thing is, David? No one's buying these Chinese EVs. No one. We're not even importing them, right? No matter how
Yeah.
good they are, it's irrelevant. But the government's giving up a huge canola industry that's a made in Canada success story for an EV industry from China that doesn't exist in Canada. It's crazy, and that's been our ask. Just drop the EV tariffs. And first off, let's have some dialogue with these countries. We haven't spoken to China. We haven't spoken to the United States. We don't really know what they want. It's absolutely crazy that Canada's not on the ground there trying to find solutions for Canadians, Americans, and the Chinese, so we can get back to what we had. And I don't know if it's possible to get back there anymore. Especially we've let that relationship in the United States kind of go to crap now. And China, we're not talking to them. We don't have anyone on the ground. Back in the day when Harper was government, when something like this happened, somebody was on a flight the next day. A minister was there trying to fix things, and we don't have that with this government. They don't care.
That's probably indicative of government right now, especially from the feds. They don't have any caring but understanding. I always amazes me when I used to argue with people about the carbon tax, and they couldn't understand why would this affect farmers, and they don't seem to realize that the price is affected because you guys have to adapt to increasing energy costs, heating your farms, moving your produce. And once again, it's not just a lack of empathy, it's a complete lack of understanding about what's going on here with farm. I think we need more education. So I've got a clip here from Scott Moe, your premier, and I think he was quite right in what he says here.
I noticed this morning already that his first planned international visit is to the European Union. Not good. Not good. We don't have a trade war with the European Union today. We are in the midst of a trade war with the United States of America and China, the two largest economies in the world and our two largest export markets and trading partners.
And yes, Mark Carney runs off to Europe. And interestingly enough, he runs off to Europe and comes back with absolutely nothing. And in the meantime, of course, we have a trade war with the United States, which he loves to sound bombastic and tough about that. But he's done absolutely nothing about that either. But interestingly enough, I think it's fascinating that he's done nothing about China. And of course, we learned this week that Mark Carney went to Beijing last October, 2024. And while he was supposed to be there working for the federal government, although he was technically working for the Liberal Party or the Prime Minister's office, he organized a loan for his Brookfield Assets Management, $276 million from the Chinese central bank while he was there. comes back and claims he did great things for Canada. But as Pierre Poilievre pointed out the other day, is this somebody who can be trusted to stand for Canada or to object to this Chinese tariff if he seems to be in the pocket of China?
Yeah, that's definitely a valid question. First off, shout out to Premier Mo for getting rid of all the carbon taxes in Saskatchewan. That's a huge deal for farmers and everyone here in our province. But when it comes to China and leadership at the government level, it's not there. We're lacking leadership. We're lacking any direction. We're lacking any forward, future-looking people. And it's unfortunate Carney went to Europe instead of places that we're having trade war with. Dialogue and relationships are important, and we don't want headlines. We want things fixed, and they seem to be catering to the headlines, and that's very unfortunate. And we're caught in the crosshairs, quite frankly.
Yes, you certainly do. I want to play a quick video here because I'm sure a lot of viewers, every time I mention canola in connection with China or in connection with Canada or with anything, some comments come through about why is canola so important? Why can't they just grow something else? And I try to explain that this is a cash crop that is essential to your livelihood. And if people try to look back in the past, it's like cotton or tobacco used to be. You couldn't eat them, but they sure as heck helped pay the bills when people grew these crops, and they were basically standard. So I'm just going to play this video here.
So I thought I'd share a little bit of farmer math today. This is a 5,000 bushel bin of canola that I harvested last fall. Now, at current values at the elevator right now, this bin is worth $62,500. You're probably thinking, wow, that's a lot of money, right? The problem is that on my farm, the cost of production on this bin of canola was $65,000. So at the current values that we're getting right now at the elevator, I am selling this canola at a loss. Now, this is a direct result of tariffs that have been introduced against Canada that our federal government doesn't seem to want to acknowledge or do anything about. Now, we don't want handouts as farmers. We just want these tariffs resolved. Like, at least try to do something about it. We're hurting out here. We need something. So if you could please at least react to it and show us that you at least care about what's going on in Western Canada with this canola, that would be nice.
Yes, that would be nice. I think it's one of the reasons I'm doing this show. We have a lot of viewers in Saskatchewan, Alberta, who are in the agricultural industry, farmers. I interviewed a fish harvester, as they like to call themselves, today from Newfoundland, and they're in the same boat. They're wondering why the federal government just doesn't seem to care, doesn't seem to even acknowledge that there's a crisis. And I think it's important that people understand what canola is to you. So, will you be able to break even this year with the prices dropping so much?
No, canola is a lost crop right now. Unfortunately, there's some time in the year that we could see drastic changes, but today it's hard to pencil out, and we're ready to put our crop in the ground here in about a month. So those decisions are pretty much already made. To put some context into John's video there, Canadians are employed through agriculture. 1 in 9 Canadians are employed because of agriculture. That's a massive number. And for the government, the current government and Carney to worry about headlines and votes instead of Canadians in this circumstance, that's exactly what's happening. And it's really unfortunate. And instead of helping Canadians or fixing the problems or not creating the problems, they're looking for votes. And in my mind, and I think a lot of Canadians' minds, that's just wrong, right? It's not to be super partisan, but Canada first. It's that simple. Let's think about Canadians. Let's do what's right. Let's stop causing these problems. And when the problems arise, let's fix them. Let's build relationships. Let's have dialogue, and care about Canadians coast to coast to coast. I know there's some some platitudes in there, but it's true, right? It's Canada first, fix the problems, build relationships, and the EV tariffs. It's not complicated.
Yeah, in Canada first, I find that that's of course the Conservative Party platform, basically, or the at least the slogan they're using for the campaign. Whereas Mark Carney is standing behind Canada Strong, which I find absolutely ludicrous. But but can Mark Carney even pretend to be strong for Canada when he's an Irish citizen? Somebody posted this the other day. I thought it was fascinating. An Irish citizen getting Chinese loans and who moved his primary company to New York just just before he announced he was going to run for the Liberal leadership. So Canada first from Mark Carney, I don't think it's even possible or even likely. But here's one of my least favorite cabinet ministers, and I used to do question period every day live, and when this man came on to talk about issues, people would just either leave in droves or say, "I have to turn the sound down." But here's Minister Champagne talking about something he knows nothing about.
About actually other tariffs that are being levied on Canadian agriculture products in this products in this sense. Over the weekend, China said that it would impose counter tariffs to the EV ones that we put on back in the summer. Is your government thinking about considering removing any tariffs on China? Any of those EV tariffs, for example?
We're not.
You will not.
We're not.
Even given the issues with the United States right now, there's no second guessing our posture towards trade with China at this moment?
Well, I would say not with respect to the tariffs that we put, because there was a good reasons. We would say we would never be a backdoor to cheap Chinese vehicles, which are overly subsidized and where they don't respect labor law and environmental laws. I mean, there's a reasons why they're dumping steel in North America, and you see these cheap vehicles coming here. We want to protect our industry. We want to protect our workers. We want to protect our communities. And the reasons why we imposed the tariff in the first place still remain very valid today, because we want to protect our industry. And the problem.
So no big opening to China at this moment, like one premier has essentially called for a rethink of that.
I would say with respect to the tariffs we put, there was a very, very specific reason. Okay. And I think people understood that well. And the last thing you would want is my point is, it's a bigger thing. If you look at the forest as opposed to the tree, you said, let's establish rules. If everyone respect the rules, I know we win. The problem now is that on this case, you have China who does not respect the rules, and therefore they're dumping products here and cheap products, and therefore that would be hurting our Canadian economy and industry. So we're going to stand strong. We're going to stand firm. We're going to fight for Canadian interests. And honestly, our mission is to, like I said, we cannot allow uncertainty to become the new certainty in North America, because it goes to undermine our competitiveness in North America, and that's going to affect our national security over the long term. And I think that message is now resonating in Washington.
All right, question for you, Daryl, and any other comments you have on Champagne's dissertation there. He says he's fighting for Canada. He said he's fighting for Canada. How can he be fighting for Canada when there's a 100% tariff on canola oil?
Right, and there were some crazy comments there. First off, we don't have an EV industry in Canada, right? The second comment was he was blaming China for highly subsidizing their EV industry. These guys literally gave $50 billion to the EV industry, $50 billion from taxpayers to companies that are now going bankrupt. So that's pretty rich in that circumstance. But when you're looking out for when you're trying to say that you're looking out for one side of the country and not the other side of the country, that's divisive as hell. Like that helps nobody. That's why I come back to they're worried about headlines. They're worried about votes. They're not worried about Canadians. They're self-serving, some of them, and they want to get reelected. So they're going to do whatever they think is best to get themselves reelected. And that's not putting Canadians first.
Well, and we heard, of course, Mark Carney outrage over the auto tariff proposal, and anything for Ontario will move heaven and earth to make sure Ontario is served. That's always been the case from the federal government. But do you think I guess it's an obvious question, an obvious answer, but do you think there's always been a preference for central Canada and eastern Canadian interests over Western Canada?
I definitely think from being out west, we feel that way. I think in a lot of the policies, definitely over the last decade, it's shown that it is that way. The carbon tax had a perverse effect on Western Canadians, on the industries that help us thrive, and quite frankly, the industries that pay Canadians ways to a certain extent. So uh, there is that Western separation sentiment because of that. I'm afraid if we do see another liberal government, where that sentiment's going to go. And we're on that route because of divisive talk that we've had out of the government for the last 10 years, and policies that are aimed directly at agriculture and oil and gas in the West.
Yeah, I would agree with you, Daryl. I'm hearing a level of anger from Alberta right now, even from someone like Daniel Smith, whom I've known for many years and was a guest on this show 2 or 3 weeks ago. Even from someone like Daniel Smith, who's very reasonable in her approach and very tough, but very reasonable, and she does not use rhetoric recklessly. And when she's talking about a constitutional crisis, and when she's talking about this could have very dire repercussions for Alberta, when she's talking about the effect of Mark Carney winning this election, eh, I'm concerned that we are going to be back where we were in 1984, and I'm old enough to remember when Pierre Trudeau finished his regime in 1984. There was tremendous Western alienation at that point, and it certainly could have gone into separation had it not been siphoned elsewhere at the time. And I'm not sure there's any other place to siphon that alienation right now if Mark Carney wins this election. So I think you're extremely right when you make that assessment, and it does concern me because I don't think Mark Carney has any plans to implement any of the things he's doing right now. He is the same Mark Carney who was advising the Liberal Party for 10 years. He's a net zero enthusiast. He wants to kill fossil fuels, doesn't give a damn about farmers. They're just in the way. And by the way, they produce too much greenhouse gas emissions. I'm curious, how did the carbon tax affect you personally and your farm? How did that carbon tax affect you?
There were studies done where it costs a lot of money. I don't have the numbers in front of me. Thankfully, all the leaders have said they're going to get rid of it. I guess time will tell. I'm a little skeptical if the Liberals will get rid of their golden goose policy. So that definitely concerns me. Everything we do, everything we get, all the parts we get, all the inputs we get, had a carbon tax on it. There's a good example. All our grain is exported, so it has to get to the West Coast somehow. So the carbon tax that was charged to the railways gets passed down to farmers. That's one example. The carbon tax that gets charged to bring a combine part from Winnipeg to Saskatoon gets charged to farmers. So there was all those little hidden costs that the Liberals kind of said, oh, those don't exist. Those don't exist. Sure, we had some exemptions, but it was still costing the egg industry in Western Canada hundreds of millions of dollars a year. For what? We're already stewards of the land. We already do what we do better than any other country in the world. We grow our canola, our wheat, our pulses more sustainably, if we want to use that word, than any country in the world right now. There's study after study. There's the Global Institute for Food Security that just came out with a study that shows these numbers. So we were being penalized for already being the best, and always, like I said, we're stewards. We care about the land. We care about the environment. Our livelihood depends on it. So to have a carbon tax on farmers when we're doing the best already was a little perverse. There's no doubt about that.
And I don't believe for a minute that Mark Carney is even going to remain true to his pledge to eliminate the personal carbon tax. And he's already said he's going to have a corporate carbon tax, which will be passed on to farmers and consumers. And he wants a carbon tariff as well, which will be devastating to Canadian industry. Although somehow he's finding a silver lining in it all. I don't know how. But if Mark Carney gets a bigger EU trade deal, will that actually help grain farmers and canola farmers like you?
You know, that's a tough one. I think the amount of Canadian trade that goes to Europe is under 10%. It's always good to diversify markets. We've said that, but with their environmental rules, like they're over the top. Like we had some of the most stringent rules in the world, but Europe is a different animal when it comes to that. So our product isn't necessarily liked in Europe because of that. But diversifying markets is a good thing. But Canada cannot be a trading nation without proper relationships with the USA and China, right? Europe cannot take everything that we make, everything that we grow. It's just that simple. More markets, the better. But you need the powerhouses to really succeed. USA is so important.
So what's the best case scenario for you? And this will be my final question. I want to thank you for being with me this morning. Is there a best case scenario right now, or has the damage been done? And are we going to see farm closures? Are we going to see tremendous financial dislocation for our farmers in Western Canada?
You know, things are dire. And with the lack of relationships and dialogue that the current federal government has, and you know that the Trudeau government kind of wrecked the good relationships we have, it concerns me where we're going. The canola tariffs are definitely going to hurt farmers, and there seems to be no end in sight, which is unfortunate. But who's next? What's next? We have no leadership. We have no long-term plans. What's the next? Is India going to say again, we don't want your pulses? Is who knows, right? What's next? So the next one is just a compounding problem. Canola is a huge one, but the next one could wipe out a lot of farmers.
Well, that doesn't bode well.
No,
I'm certainly doing everything I can to stop Mark Carney from being elected as prime minister. He's an unelected, as far as I'm concerned, installed prime minister by the globalists. And I don't think he gives a hoot about how your farm is doing or how any farm is doing. And I don't think he really cares about the Canadian economy. I think he cares about the globalist one. And I want to get as many people on this program as possible who can tell me and tell our viewers how they're personally affected by the Liberal Party policies that Mark Carney will perpetuate, despite all of his attempts to say, I'm different, I'm an outsider. I'm an agent of change. And I guess I'll finish the program with you. Do you think Mark Carney is an agent of change, Daryl?
I don't feel that he is. You know, if the Liberals win, and I hope they don't, I hope what he's saying is true. I don't feel that way. When 90% of the caucus is back, when 90% of the cabinet is the old people, when he's bringing in radical people like the mayor of Vancouver, who was one of the top proponents of legalizing hard drugs, when he's bringing in activists, when he has Mr. Guilbeault still on his side, I don't see a change. I'm hopeful there is, and maybe that's my jaded opinion, but you don't bring those kind of people in. You don't have the track record that Mr. Carney has and not be the same as what we had. That's how I feel, unfortunately.
Wow, I don't think I could have said that better. You don't have the track record that Mr. Carney has and be any different. Darrell, thank you so much for joining me today. And our thoughts and prayers are with your farm and so many other farms in Western Canada. I'm from British Columbia originally. I hope to get back there someday. So my heart is in the West. And I thank you for joining this program today. And Godspeed.
Absolutely. Thank you, David.
Thank you, Darrell. Bye for now. That was Daryl Franzo, Saskatchewan farmer. Canola. Big big issue. And we need to know more about canola. Before we go, though, I wanted to talk about what happened yesterday with Mark Carney and the very weird incident where he was asked about his connection to Jeffrey Epstein.
On ne reconnaît pas les différences. On ne reconnaît pas les peuples autochtones.
How many kids did he molest with Jeffrey Epstein?
Honnêtement. Il y aura. OK. Je veux continuer. Ça marche. Wow. OK. Mon Dieu. Look, give up your... So, this is the... ça, c'est le produit. Ça, c'est le produit des politiques de division.
Wow. As Frank Sinatra used to say, what the hell was that? And I'm nobody's sure exactly what he said, because of course, there were all kinds of posts immediately that this was some kind of witchcraft incantation or satanic rite, because that's what Jeffrey Epstein was all about. These people are devil worshippers. The Epstein crew. Who else would want to corrupt young children this way? And I won't get into I won't add on to that because of the problems with saying those things. But we're not sure whether he was talking in some northern dialect, Eoa, or whether it was just Mark Carney's atrocious French. I don't know. I welcome your comments, because I have no idea. Honestly, this is Marty up north. Guess here is honestly ignorant. His French is absolutely brutal. He can't have an unrehearsed casual conversation. I've been saying this for weeks. No, he has to have the questions in front of him, or he has to already have the French responses or the French phrases memorized, or at least phoneticized, because his French is atrocious. And and I would say, fine. If you can't speak French, you can't speak French. It just happens to be a tenet of the Liberal Party that all of their leaders should be fluently bilingual. That's been the Liberal Party tenet for decades. Even before official bilingualism, that was a party tenet going back to Louis Saint Laurent in the 1950s, probably the latter years of Mackenzie King, going back to the late 1940s. Suddenly, the Liberal Party doesn't care if you speak French. And this guy won't even go to the French debate. But is there any evidence that Mark Carney has some connection to Jeffrey Epstein? Well, his wife was on the Jeffrey Epstein contact list. Was Jeffrey Epstein on that list? It's still blacked out. It's still redacted. So we're not sure. But here's a little more information about that.
This is his wife, Diana Carney. And this is Ghislaine Maxwell, the recruiter for notorious pedophile Jeffrey Epstein's global child sex trafficking ring. Carney says he knew nothing of their crimes when he spoke to her at this party. But is that true? This photo is from 2013, 5 years after Epstein was first convicted of sex with minors. It was taken at the estate of Tanya Waltherwick, a British aristocrat who happens to be the one and only sister of Diana Carney. Tanya is known to be a close personal friend of Maxwell since high school. When Maxwell's father was arrested for his own crimes many decades ago, the Daily Mail reported that it was Tanya who she went to go cry to. And Jeffrey Epstein himself had 7 different numbers under Diana Carney's sister's name in his infamous little black book, 2 of which are for someone named Diana. Was Mark Carney really unaware of who Maxwell was? Or did he just not care? Who is Mark Carney?
Who is Mark Carney? He's in the pocket of China. He's in the pocket of the globalists. He is a friend of evil people. He is a mover and shaker for globalism, for the United Nations, for the World Economic Forum, who wants to come to Canada and impose that agenda. And by the way, the guy who asked the question about Jeffrey Epstein at that Carney rally, he's the host of Make Canada Great Again. That's a YouTube site. He used to always block his face, and I thought that was rather odd, but he's out now. And I'm going to see if I can get him on the show this weekend to talk about this experience, because it takes guts to go to a Liberal rally and to ask a question like that, a very impertinent question. No, it wasn't rude. It wasn't a rude question. It was not something Mark Carney was expecting to come from the crowd. But believe me, he'd never be allowed to ask that question as a journalist, as a citizen journalist, as anything after the event. Somehow he managed to get in the event and ask the question. So good for him. I say thumbs up. I say good for you. And hopefully you'll come on my show this weekend and talk about it, because it takes guts to do that, especially when you get roughed up by the Liberal crowd. He got roughed up by the Liberal crowd. And by the way, before I go, our last look here, look at Pierre Poilievre last night in Surrey. Look at that crowd. Humongous. 5,500. Minimum 4,000, probably, perhaps even 6,000. So why is Pierre Poilievre now, and I have to mention this, I almost forgot to put this up here. This is Abacus poll. He's now behind 37 to 38%. He's 1 percentage point behind the Liberals. Pierre Poilievre is 1 percentage point behind the Liberals in an Abacus poll. Abacus polls have routinely, I think, accurately showed conservative support. When you fall behind in an Abacus poll, there's a problem. Now, why is Pierre Poilievre getting these huge crowds? Mark Carney's crowds are not as large. I think it's the Kamala Harris effect, folks. You remember Kamala Harris? She was getting huge crowds, and she was consistently scoring high in the polls. She was either beating Donald Trump or tied with Donald Trump in all of the swing states. Bingo! On election day, she gets wiped out. Donald Trump wins that election very effectively. Now, you tell me, is this the Kamala Harris effect? Kamala Harris crowds were never as big as the media presented them. Her numbers were never as high. Is this what's happening? And I thought about it this morning. Okay, so why are the polls so skewed? What's going on here? There's got to be something going on, because you can't tell me the conservative support is collapsing this way, and that everybody thinks Mark Carney is a savior for Canada, even for the Liberal Party, for that matter. Why are people so excited about Mark Carney? I think people don't want to answer polls. They don't want to talk to pollsters because they're afraid they might get in trouble if they answer in the wrong way. So I think the Conservatives are being radically underrepresented in these polls. And for that matter, I think the People's Party of Canada is being radically underrepresented in these polls. They're underpolling because people don't want to tell pollsters that they're voting Conservative or People's Party of Canada. They'll not say anything, or in some cases, I think they actually lie. We have found this conclusively in U.S. politics. It's been happening. So I think this might be a phenomenon right now in Canadian politics. I find this fascinating. But believe me, I don't think Mark Carney is going to take this election in a cakewalk. This is what he thinks it is. He thinks he's been installed to become prime minister, and he's going to get that legitimacy in a federal election. You're not going to give it to him, folks. He's not going to get it. We still have the power of the vote in this country. We still have the power to fight back. We still have the power of free speech, which Trudeau tried to take away from us. But thankfully, he did not get the Online Harms Act passed before he fell from power. Online Harms Act is dead. We still have freedom of speech on this internet. We still have freedom of speech. There are no thought crimes yet in Canada. Nobody's going to come to our door and lock us up for what we say. Nobody's going to lock us up because of what we think. And we still have the freedom to fight back. So that's where we are today. I'll be back again tomorrow, folks, with all the news that you need to know. Thanks for watching today. Godspeed you.